The Dallas Cowboys told everybody they were all in the 2024 offseason, but from the way that we're seeing it, they might just be all in reverse this season. That and more on today's episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into your Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm David Harrison. He is Tony Wiggins, both of us credentialed members of the media covering NFL teams. Tony is in Duval County. I know I didn't say that right, but Duval right now, you got to let me go with that because things aren't sunshiny in Duval these days right now. He's not in the NFL world, so that's why it's a little bit tempered, right? A little bit tempered down. I am in the Washington, D.C. area covering the Washington Commanders, and so I know all about dark clouds hanging over franchises. Believe me, you'll be all right. Both of us have over a decade of covering our respective teams or the NFL. Tony is hosting Locked On Jags. I'm hosting Locked On Commanders, and Locked On NFL is here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers and everydayers. You already know because we tell you every day, but we're going to tell you anyway. We appreciate you for coming through. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create your account, use the promo code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's episode, Tony and I are going to talk about the potential of no more OTA practices as early as 2025. We're also going to talk about all of that drama going down in the Sunshine State in Jacksonville, a little bit of rain happening in paradise, as it were. But we're going to start off, Tony. There was an earlier episode of Locked On NFL this week where Ross Jackson and Luke Braun talked about the most improved teams in the National Football League. And I thought that was a very, very great way to open up a show. But I wanted to open up this show kind of flipping that thing on its head. And it's not just to be negative, but every conversation deserves the opposite side of that conversation. And Ross and Luke might have well gone through and talked about some teams they thought have regressed as well. But we're going to lead off here with our wide lens of the National Football League and talk about teams that we think have stepped back the most this NFL season. And you've already graciously allowed me to start off this conversation because, as I said in the opening here, mine's a little bit maybe of a hot take, not so much that they haven't done a lot this offseason, but I do think the Dallas Cowboys are regressing. Not only are they staying in one place, Tony, they are regressing. And I'm going to start it off with this, and I want to get your initial reaction before I dive a little bit deeper into my conspiracy theory bag here. But I have this theory. You've heard variations of it, if not the exact way I'm going to put it. But essentially, here's how this works in a competitive field. I don't care if it's football or any competitive field you are in. Everybody around you is constantly trying to get better, constantly trying to improve, constantly trying to move forward. So if you are not moving forward, you are not standing still, my friend. You are moving backwards because those people who are moving forward are either catching up with you or putting distance between them and where you are. The Dallas Cowboys have definitely at best stood still this offseason, but I think they've actually gotten worse in multiple ways that I want to dive into with Tony. First and foremost, what do you think about my take? This is 3 weeks in a row now, by the way, that I've dogged an NFC East team. I swear it's not on purpose. But what do you think about my take? The Dallas Cowboys are one of the teams this year that have stepped back the most.
All right, little housekeeping here, right? So I was going to choose Dallas, right? Because if a couple of weeks ago when we did our predictions, I picked them dead last for the NFC East. And if they come in dead last in the NFC East after being where they were last year, then that would mean that by default, that they're going to regress, right? But since we both had the same team and I had another team in mind, I was like, nah, man, I'm going to take the other team. But I totally agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. So I had to do that housekeeping because people are going to be like, didn't you just pick them to come forth? And how are you going to say they ain't regressing? Well, we're both saying they're regressing, but I think David, covering the NFC East team, knows more about that than me. So this is the humble step back. But now I'm going to step up. I don't cover the AFC East. But guess what? Buffalo, it's obvious they've gone backwards, but it comes with a caveat. It comes with a caveat. And I'll tell you what that is in just a second. Here's the thing about Dallas. Dak Prescott, that whole mess, that whole contract mess, 1 year to go, $59 million. He's not going to be a Dallas Cowboy after this year. They can't trade him. They're not going to re-sign him because they're going to re-sign him. They do it now. Because if he goes out and plays lights out and they have to re-sign him, then it's $70 million a year. I'm holding them hostage. Y'all had me doing all of this. So that's not going to happen. We already know Jerry Jones is looking to go in another direction with that. But the Dallas Cowboys seem to be the type of team, I liken it to an NBA team where, like the Clippers, where you look at them and you go, oh, they got him, they got him, they got him, they got him, and they got him, they got him. But guess what? When you make all of those hims one them, it don't work. And it always seems to fizzle out in the playoffs when teams get really, really myopic about their opponents, when teams take the one thing or one or two things away from you that you can't do, then it always comes back and it looks like Dak is the one that's inept. You remember in the playoffs against the 49ers where he didn't spike the ball. Yep. He ran the ball. And it's like, where's your awareness, right? And then last year, in the first quarter of the game, CeeDee Lamb's body language, because they kept throwing slants and they couldn't get him the ball. And it's like they make big plays, but those big plays don't mean anything. It's like playing a basketball team that hits a nice, pretty three, gets a nice 360, makes a nice behind the back pass, and then do a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't make any sense. And then you look up and they're down 10 points in the first quarter. That's who the Dallas Cowboys are. You see the talent, you just don't get the results. They haven't won anything. Now, close your eyes. Close your eyes, everybody. The way folks present the Cowboys, the way we talk about the Cowboys, and the way that the Dallas Cowboys walk around with their football self-esteem, with their chest all puffed up, you'd think they'd have won 8 Super Bowls in the last 15 years. They ain't won jack in 3 decades, okay? They haven't. So the fact is maybe now who they really are will match how we feel about them. I think the record is going to stink. I think this is a team that is going backwards, and they have done a real good job. This is the only thing. This is my saving grace for them. They do real good job of cherry picking talented football players. They do a horrible job of team building, and those are 2 different things. When you talk to scouts.
Absolutely. Wig. 2 off seasons ago, the Dallas Cowboys said, we want to run the ball more. So they let Ezekiel Elliott walk out the door, and they put Tony Pollard, who's coming off of a broken stinking leg, as their primary back, a guy who can't run between the tackles consistently. And that's not even a knock on him. That's just the facts of it. It didn't work. So what did they do this offseason? They let Tony Pollard walk out the door, and they brought Zeke back, quite literally moving backwards to decisions they should have made years ago. Here's the final conspiracy theory part of this whole mess. Not only are there members of that roster that don't believe in Mike McCarthy, the ownership does not believe in Mike McCarthy. You know how the ownership doesn't? You know how I know the ownership does not believe in Mike McCarthy, Wig? Because the Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator, after Dan Quinn took the head coaching job in Washington, is Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer has 0 working history with Mike McCarthy. But Mike Zimmer was the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys in the early 2000s. So who do you think made that hire? You think Mike McCarthy made that hire? You think Jerry Jones made that hire? Jerry Jones made that hire, and he put Mike Zimmer in place because guess who the interim head coach is going to be if Mike McCarthy gets yanked midseason? And oh, by the way, Mike Zimmer, you're leading the number 5 ranked defense in the National Football League heading into a first place schedule. If your defense, because he's already said, this is a great defense, but I got to do it my way. If your way does not produce, and it doesn't produce at a top 5 rate early, DeMarcus Lawrence, Osa Odigizua, Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, all of these guys who were thriving on their way to big money contracts under a previous defensive coordinator are going to lose their faith in you. And guess what, Jerry Jones? Your future interim head coach is going to lose the locker room before you ever even put him in the place.
They are a mess. Let me hit Buffalo real quick so before we end the segment. And it's going to be real fast. Yeah, they're going backwards, but I don't want Bills Mafia to get angry at me. They're going backwards. Now, when you look at all of the guys, the guys that I think about, of course, Niall Diggs, Diggs. I always did it. Stephon Diggs. Yep. I cannot believe I bought up Niall Diggs and he ain't played in 15, 17 years, right? He was a linebacker. But Stephon Diggs, obviously, using all-pro level receiver. And then, to me, the heartbeat, Jordan Poyer. And, of course, Von Miller isn't the same. They've lost some pieces. They've lost some critical parts. Mitch Morse, the center, is here in Jacksonville. Gabe Davis. My thing is, I do think that they're making the correct decision, though, because once you get there and you're paying all of these guys, you got to keep paying people. But you realize you got your finger on the pulse of the team and you say, we've done all we can. And the Chiefs are still sitting right there. And Baltimore is going to be Baltimore. We need to do something else. So I think Buffalo's doing the right thing. I do think they're going to take a step back, but I think they're taking a necessary step back to take a step forward later.
Yeah, I mean, the question honestly is Coach McDermott gonna survive all these good decisions? Because you can look at, like you said, you look at some of the players they've let walk away, the trades they made, and you say, okay, you know what? Honestly, a healthy organization makes those moves. But this is also a team that's had a championship window open for a few years now, and they've never been able to step through it. I don't know if Sean McDermott is going to survive making those right moves long enough to see the fruit of those right moves come to bear. It might be in the next head coach that talks about that. Speaking of the next head coaches, the Jacksonville Jaguars had to move on from a very dramatic head coach to a new head coach. And now that head coach has got a lot of drama around him. So we're going to talk about the mess that Doug Peterson is now in, along with the entire Jacksonville Jaguars organization. Coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive, right? eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because of eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listener, your first view today and every day, everydayers. Thanks for coming through on a regular basis like you do. Make sure you come back Monday. Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens will be holding down Locked On NFL on Monday, giving you the hottest stories and the biggest stories from around the weekend of the National Football League. In the meantime, make sure you're also checking out Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Get that for free again on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Speaking of fire, Wig, there's some heat brewing in Jacksonville. Look, I've never been to Jacksonville, Florida before until I had to drive to Orlando for the annual league meetings. I had to drive through Jacksonville, and I kind of kicked myself because I was like, man, if I knew I was coming through Jacksonville, I'd have hooked up with Wig, maybe see if we could do lunch or something on the way through. Right. But by the time I knew I was going through Jacksonville, I was already in Jacksonville, and I didn't want to drop in on you like that. But what I can tell you is this, just from driving through Jacksonville, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. There's a lot of scenery. There's a lot of good things to see, but Jacksonville gets bad weather just like everybody else, Wig. There's a storm brewing in Jacksonville right now. So for those who don't pay close attention to other teams, let everybody know what's going on and let everybody know what might be coming next.
All right, so here's the thing. Let me give you a little bit of a framework of what's going on in Jacksonville before these allegations, right? People were laughing at Jacksonville because some dude that worked for the team stole $22 million from them. I mean, no checks and balances, stole $22 million, ended up getting caught, gambled all the money away, went to federal court, got sent to prison. So you can Google all that stuff, but I'm just setting it up for you. And a lot of the people, I'm not one of them, maybe you and guys like Ross and Luke, y'all know what it's like to be millionaires, right? A lot of those people were saying, how could somebody steal $22 million from a company and a corporation and nobody saw it? So it gave this feeling that there was a lack of control and a lack of oversight from people in leadership positions, correct? So these allegations come out. Actually, it was right before I went on to Mexico last week that two young ladies are saying that they were inappropriately touched in several ways. And you go read the report. I'm not going to sit here and tell you all of that stuff either, because that ain't what we're here to do. That they were inappropriately touched on a plane, team charter. They were touched by Brandon McManus, a team charter that flew the Jaguars to London last year. Okay. And folks kind of like blew it off a little bit. The first day of OTAs, Doug Peters was asked about it. And Doug Peters was like, the first I ever heard about it was when the report from ESPN came out over the weekend. So this is the head coach. Now, this is the framework where I'm going here. The first the head coach heard about it was when we heard about it. He wasn't going to have a whole bunch to say because of legal. I get it. So apparently in the report, they said that there were alcohol, that McManus was obviously influenced by alcohol. And then I heard today that somebody said there may have been weed on the plane. I don't know who the hell lights up on the plane. That's the craziest stuff ever. Now, the Jaguars charter plane, players on one level, coaches on another. So it's obvious that there's some things that could go on down there when you're trying to give guys their privacy that you don't see. Now, so we move this to today. A lot of people are like, man, there's flights. People drink on flights all the time, man. Ain't no big deal with that. Just skirting right past the allegations and whether they're true or not. And Brandon McManus now plays for the team you cover, Washington. So is it the point that whether you should be drinking on planes or not? No, but that's where I'm going to sit here and stop, because I hate when people want to not abide by rules and want to just look past something, and they're looking past the more serious allegations of inappropriately touching, not talking, but touching somebody. And I think that that's extremely important. What this represents, it appears that Shad Khan looks like he's a bad leader. All right. And I'm going to tell you why this is important. And I appreciate you giving me the grace to go here. So I'm going to read an article from CBS Sports. This was 2022. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell sent a memo to teams Friday back then. In light of recent events, clubs are reminded that league policy prohibits alcoholic beverages, including beer, in the locker room, practice, or facilities, or while driving on team buses or planes at any time during the preseason, regular season, postseason. Period. End of discussion. Anybody that violates it will be severely punished for doing so. So when you're talking about severely punishing a team for some conduct, in light of the fact that they just let $22 million go away, and then they went trying to get creditors or people that the money was spent to give them back, and the people was like, we ain't doing it. They look bad in that. They look bad in this too. If there was alcohol on the, I'm going to go right where people don't want me to go. Yeah, they're stupid if there was alcohol on the plane. And you know why the league does that? Didn't Kansas City have a coach leave the facility and hit somebody and a little girl got hurt?
Yep.
It happened with Tennessee too, right? It happened with the Titans. Got a DUI when you left the facility. The team is trying to say, it's not even necessarily about liability. You're making us look bad. It's PR. Let's stop the foolishness. We are the leaders in the community. We're supposed to be setting an example, right? So if there was, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody come out now and say somebody was doing lines on there. How you get weed on a plane and smoke? How you lighting up on the, I don't believe it. It's not about whether or not it's true. But here's the problem. Shad Khan is an absent owner, in my opinion. Shad Khan does not have a senior executive vice president. Shad Khan is not sitting around the Jaguars facility every day making sure that people understand. Leadership is this. Don't do it. And when I turn around and walk away, you don't do it. David, you know that better than me. When the cat's away, mics don't play when you're making millions of dollars. If there's a heavy fine that comes down on Jacksonville, and then Rusty Harden, who was on the other side of Deshaun Watson's defense, who he was not, well, the person, not Rusty Harden, that was Deshaun Watson's lawyer. The person who went at Deshaun Watson on behalf of those plaintiffs is the same guy. And these young ladies are from Houston. And here's the part, and maybe he can prove this, and this is where it looks bad. He says, I tried to reach out to him and resolve it. And I'm paraphrasing, but I was met with arrogance. That doesn't look good. And then when you add that to this other stuff, you add it to Urban Meyer, you add it to the hiring of that strength and conditioning coach from Iowa that they had to fire. All of this stuff has happened in the last 4 years over the watch of that owner. That is a problem. We talk about Dave Tepper with his stuff. It is a problem. Dave Tepper does stuff. Shad Khan doesn't do anything. It's about being right, or it's about being wrong when you commit, and it's about being wrong when you omit. It's not just the things you do, it's the things you fail to do as a leader. And at some point, we got to start questioning why the Jaguars always find themselves on this side of bad news.
Yep. It's lack of leadership. At the end of the day, man, that's all it is, lack of leadership. I can tell you right now, man, you know how many flights I have been on in my previous career where, you know this, Wig, when you get on a military flight, a C-130, a C-5, whatever it is, you don't go through customs. Well, you might go through customs, depending on where you are, but you don't go through inspections the way that everybody else goes on inspections.
No.
I promise you right now, there are several flights that me, other peers of mine, or my soldiers could have, if they wanted to, sneak a six-pack onto a plane and crack them open and drink them down. You know why we didn't do it? Because you got leaders on the plane.
You're scared too.
Bottom line is this, and you want to protect your career. Look, Everybody on that plane, everybody on every NFL plane, on every NFL bus, on every NFL building, there ain't nobody keeping you there. If you don't want to be there, you don't got to be there. If you don't want to follow the rules of the career you are choosing, you don't got to choose that career. Bottom line, you have free will. Nobody can take that free will away from you. I used to tell soldiers all the time, you don't want to be in the Army anymore. Simply come to me or your commander and say, I don't want to do this anymore. And guess what? You will go home. You're not going to like the process of getting you home. You're probably not going to like how long it takes to get you home, but you will eventually go home.
When you get home because of your paperwork.
Yeah, you may not like what happens when you get home. In the National Football League, you don't got to worry about all that. Let me tell you something. If you're the quarterback of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Trevor Lawrence, and you decide, I don't want to play football anymore, all you got to do is say, I don't want to play football no more. And you don't play football no more. So if you don't want to abide by the rules of the National Football League, you don't got to do it. Nobody's holding you there. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, and I'm not naive enough, and you're not naive enough, and our listeners aren't naive enough to think that nobody else is doing this crap. I got it. But at the end of the day, like you said, there's a trend with this organization. And it for guys like me who don't pay attention to this team closely every single day, it goes back to a head coach staying back on a road trip to cheat on his wife. And now you got this mess going on, and you got an owner, like you mentioned, that looks absent, but also not only absent, but he's hiring men to run his team who don't actually know how to run his team. This falls on Doug Peterson just as much as it falls on anybody else. Because I'm with you. If that attorney is telling the truth, which we've seen him do this song and dance before, and guess what? He might be obnoxious, but everything he said back then, nobody proved any of it wrong. Nobody ever caught him in a lie. If he's not lying now, which I don't think he probably is because of his track record, there's no way Doug Peterson didn't know about this.
Yep.
And Doug Peterson stood right there in front of a microphone and told everybody he didn't know about this. And this lawyer has been trying for the last year to get information and get this resolved. I don't see how your head coach doesn't know about this. And if your head coach did know about this going on with his roster, then there's even bigger problems above him. So there's just a lot of organizational problems going on in Jacksonville.
Well, stop right there.
Yeah.
Doug has always been straight up honest with us. If I had to guess, I think he's telling the truth. And to me, that's a bigger problem.
That is a bigger problem.
You got your flight sergeant out there and not knowing what's going on with his troops, and he has to answer questions for it. That's the same thing that happened with the Jalen Ramsey situation. And nobody want to know the real truth about that situation. Okay, about when they had him in a closet and all of this stuff, and they thought it was one thing. They thought it was something else. Jalen said it was something else. Well, I know for a fact it was something else behind that. And so when I hear all of this, I'm just thinking like it's a disconnect. Doug Marrone didn't even want to answer questions about Jalen Ramsey. He said, we're neighbors. We live down the street from each other. I love Jalen. I ain't got no problem with Jalen, but rumors said that Doug was the one that said, I can't coach him, get him out of here. So all of this misdirection and information and misinformation, it just, you know what? Look at the Jaguars record over the last 10 years, and you'll see why it exists the way it is. And it's this stuff, and it has to go.
All right, y'all. Unfortunately, news this time of year is not always good news, but usually we at least have an OTA practice or two to talk about, to fill in the gaps between the bad news. But it looks like next year we may not even have that. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On NFL, Tony Wiggins, David Harrison here. We've gone in on the Dallas Cowboys. We've gone in on the Buffalo Bills. We've gone in on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now it's time to go in on OTA practices because according to reports, the NFLPA, the NFL Players Association, is putting together or preparing a proposal to present to ownership, to NFL owners, the idea of eliminating OTA on-field practices as early as 2025. And the overall theory of the idea is to give players more time away from the game, more time to decompress, to let their bodies rest, all this stuff before you get right back to the grind of it and continue learning. So the idea is to do virtual classroom work. So if you got a player that lives in California, a player that lives in Alaska, a player that lives in Massachusetts, they all just zoom in Jacksonville, Florida, and they get their classes. They do their whiteboard stuff. They do their tape studies with the coaches, all that stuff. But the on-field practices would not start until later in the year, around mid-June, according to the reports. Basically, they would report earlier for, say, training camp, probably call it something different for the first couple of weeks, and then you get into training camp directly. Wig, there's a lot of opinions out there about this. What are your opinions initially about the idea of eliminating OTA practices in the spring of 2025?
Well, initially, I think players are going to love it because players are going to be like, that's our time. That's when we have our time away. We do the things that we need to do because, believe it or not, even though it's a team sport, there's this individual thing of taking care of your body. Your body is your business when you're on your own time. Doug Peterson even said it here in Jacksonville. What are you doing when you're not here, right? So the fragmented, I think the fragmented sessions, you're here, you're gone. You're here, you're gone. And then everybody's not here. Somebody's having a baby. Somebody's having a wedding. Somebody says that they're better off training by themselves in Arizona because it worked to help them get a big, all of this stuff. So now you eliminate all of that. And now maybe you have what is more cohesive effort and a more cohesion. I did hear Daniel Jeremiah say that coaches won't like it, coaches and scouts, because some of that time off that they used to have, even though it was fragmented, and their lives are a little bit different because they go home every day and I wouldn't call it a Monday through Friday, but it is what it is, right? I'm not talking about the guys on the road. Daniel says that normally the new OTAs, the new schedule will come in a lot of vacation times when kids are out of school. And that's when guys usually spend a lot of time with their children. And we have to take that in consideration. David, me and you are both veterans. We ain't feeling sorry for nobody who missing time with their kids. I'm just not when you're making millions of dollars when we didn't make millions of dollars. And I hate to equate everything to that. But sometimes when you're trying to make the job more fluid and you're trying to make it better for the actual people and the participants who are on the field, people off the field are going to suffer a little bit. And ain't nothing wrong with that. We come from a place where leadership always gets their way, and the people that struggle are the day in and day out troops. We're the ones that got to put up with everything. Those dudes sitting there doing what they always do, right? So in this situation, I'm admit I'm a little biased. I ain't worried about management with this. I'm worried about take care of the people, take care of the product, make sure that these guys in the strength and conditioning program, and there's a more consistency and more cohesive practice, play, the ability to make the product on the field better. And we'll catch up with your kids later on. That's just the way I feel about it if you're a management and a non-player. But I get their point. But on the other hand, at some point, you got to make a choice.
I agree with you. And I heard that as well. And I think the solution there is you got to move the dead period. Right. You got to move the dead period. So if we're not going to have the coaches, to align this for everybody who doesn't pay close attention to the NFL schedule the way that we do, because we cover these teams. Right. So like for the Washington Commanders, for example, we have a mini camp coming up June 11th through the 13th. June 14th, maybe June 13th, actually, a lot of times teams traditionally give the team that third day off from practice. They might do some classroom stuff or whatever, but for the most part, it's a light day. And they kick them out the door. June 14th to training camp, they're off. They go their separate ways. They go on vacation, like you said. The coaches get time off during that time period as well. So if the players, like you mentioned, if they get what they want and then they report mid-June, well, that's where the coaches are getting their time off. So I think what you have to do is you have to move the coaches' time off as well. And I'm thinking right after the NFL draft. The NFL draft is the last thing for the coaches. Maybe you do a rookie mini camp and you keep that intact, right? Let the coaches get their hands on the rookies for a week and then kick everybody out, whatever it is, either the week after the NFL draft or right after the NFL draft. You send the coaches on their vacations for their 2 or 3 weeks. And again, the conflict you're going to have is your kids are still in school, and that's going to be a hardship. I understand that. But at the end of the day, Wig, you know what I mean? I've always kind of had this theory. You got 3 things that you want in life. If you can get 2 out of the 3 in this current situation, you're making money. And so you just need to be happy with what you got. So you know what? Maybe you can't spend time with your kids in Hawaii. Maybe you can't spend time with your kids in Cabo San Lucas, but you're at home, you're with your children, you're not working. Take what you can get, brother. That's how I'm going to put it to you, to be quite honest with you. And then they come back to work. The coaches come back to work, say end of May. They get about a week and a half, 2 weeks to get ready for training camp or whatever you want to call it, mid-June. Players report in mid-June. Boom, we're off, we're rolling. And we've had our hands on our rookies. We've had our hands on our veterans, at least from a tape standpoint and some conversational standpoints. And now we have all that time and we're rolling straight from classroom, introduction, crawl, walk, run, right? We're moving right from crawl into walk, into run, into the NFL season. And then, at the end of the year, the guys get what they get. Here's the reason I think it's going to happen. Because the players want the players want this. The owners want something back. The owners want an 18th regular season game.
That's right.
That's what they want. And they've already been laying the groundwork. And if you listen to Roger Goodell's comments, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's a matter of when it's going to happen. That's right. I'll tell you right now, the owners and the players, guess who they prioritize over the coaches? Themselves. So if the Players Association says, hey, owners, we'll give you an 18th game, you give us no OTA practices, and the owners say, oh, you'll give us an 18th game if we give you no OTA practices, deal. And they're going to shake hands right over the heads of all those coaches. And those coaches, guess what they don't have? They have a coach association, actually. A lot of people don't know that. But they don't have the leverage. That's not going to fly for them. So unfortunately, those coaches are probably just going to have to deal with it. But hopefully in the negotiation, because I do want to protect their time off if possible, but they may have to shift it. And I understand it's not as advantageous. But again, like you mentioned, Wade, it might just be part of the job. You might just have to deal with it.
It's what it is, man. It's what it is. Good to see you again, homie.
Absolutely, man. And you know what? From a media standpoint, we get the NFL draft. We get the schedule release in May. We can talk about all the depth chart stuff for about a month. And then in June, we're hopping and popping until February. So, I mean, you know what? For the media, actually, I think we make off. And honestly, for fans, I think actually fans probably benefit from it as well. I talked to Logan Paulson, former Washington Commanders tight end or Washington tight end, about it. He said he's not too sure about it either. I get where he's coming from. Absolutely. So there's a lot of different takes about it. That's what we're here to talk about. It's Locked On NFL. It's what we do on Monday. Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens will be back to talk about even more. So make sure you're subscribed, turn on those notifications, auto downloads, whatever it is for your second listen of the day. Check out Locked On Jags, Locked On Commanders, or stay right here if you're on YouTube, and we'll send you over to Locked On Sports today. As always, thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen, your first view today and every day. Everydayers, thanks for coming back. For Tony Wiggins and David Harrison, we'll see you right back here next Friday for another episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.